The invitation arrived in my mailbox, not as a guest, but as hired help. Catering Contract, Palmer 40th Anniversary Celebration, was embossed in gold on a thick cream envelope. I stood in my kitchen, fingers tight around the paper, already knowing what I would find inside. My name is Charlotte Palmer, and at 35, I'm one of Boston's most sought-after chefs. My restaurant, Maan, boasts 2 Michelin stars and a 6-month waiting list. But to my parents, I am, and always will be, a disappointment. The daughter who turned her back on law school for a life in the kitchen. The black mark on an otherwise pristine family legacy. The contract was standard, 200 guests, dietary restrictions, a proposed menu that was painfully predictable, exactly the kind of bland, safe choices my mother would make. At the bottom, her signature was already in place, alongside a note in her precise handwriting. We expect nothing but perfection. Charlotte, do not embarrass us. I set the contract down, exhaling sharply. My eyes drifted to another letter in the morning's mail, the one I'd been avoiding for days. My grandmother's lawyer. Something about the timing felt too deliberate. With a steadying breath, I tore it open. Dear Miss Palmer, it read. As executor of Eleanor Palmer's estate, I am pleased to inform you that, following the reading of her will, you have been named the sole inheritor of both her estate and her shares in Palmer Industries. I had to read the words 3 times before they sank in. My grandmother, my father's mother, had left everything to me. Not to him. Not to my sister, Margaret. To me. The estate, the shares, even her beloved Napa vineyard. Everything my father had assumed would be his, was now mine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Have you reviewed the contract? We need an answer by tomorrow. Your father insists Maan cater the event. Of course, he did. Despite refusing to eat at my restaurant. Despite never acknowledging my success. They still wanted to use my name, to impress their friends. I picked up my phone and typed. I'll do it, send me the guest list, and I'll handle everything. Her reply was immediate. Excellent, the list is attached. Nothing too experimental, these are sophisticated people. Charlotte. I opened the file, pages of Boston's elite. My name was, of course, missing. I was just the help. That night, as I sat in my office at Maan, the contract spread out before me. My sous chef, Marcus, knocked on the door. Boss, you good? You've been staring at that paper for an hour. I looked up at him, a slow smile forming. Remember that pop-up concept we talked about, the one with interactive tables and performance elements? His eyes lit up. The dinner theater idea? Yeah, you said it was too risky for Maan. It is, I agreed, my grin widening, but I just found the perfect event to test it out. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Your parents' anniversary, you sure that's a good idea? I slid my grandmother's letter across the desk. He skimmed it, then looked up, stunned. Holy, Charlotte, this changes everything. Yes, I said, for the first time in years feeling something close to satisfaction. Yes, it does. Call the team, I added, leaning back in my chair. We're about to give my parents an anniversary they'll never forget. Over the next few weeks, I orchestrated every detail with surgical precision. I hired performers, commissioned custom tables with embedded screens, and designed a menu that didn't just showcase my skills, it told a story. My story. My mother called constantly, trying to control everything. Charlotte, the Hendersons are vegetarian now, and the Whitakers don't eat shellfish. Can you manage these restrictions? Everything is under control, I assured her each time, never mentioning the real plans taking shape. 1 week before the event, my sister Margaret appeared at Maan. She stood at the host's stand, surveying the restaurant with barely concealed disdain, before sweeping toward me. Charlotte, she called across the dining room, ignoring the curious stares of our patrons. We need to talk. I led her to my office, closing the door behind us. What's wrong, Margaret? Mother is concerned, she said, inspecting her manicured nails. She's heard whispers about some of your more creative dishes. This needs to be a proper event, not one of your, she waved a hand, artistic experiments. I smiled, thinking of what was to come. Tell Mother not to worry, I said smoothly. This will be exactly the kind of event this family deserves. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. As she walked away, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to use their anniversary to make a point? Then I remembered the exclusion, the cold shoulders, the relentless reminders that I wasn't good enough. Yes, I was. The day of the event arrived. The Four Seasons ballroom had been transformed, interactive tables with hidden projectors, a state-of-the-art sound system, every detail executed with precision. At 4 o'clock, my mother arrived for the final inspection. Her eyes swept the room, brows knitting. "Charlotte, what are all these screens for? This looks more like a tech conference than an anniversary." "Trust me, Mother," I said, voice steady, "everything has been planned to perfection, just like you wanted." She pursed her lips but said nothing. It was too late to change things now. By 6 o'clock, the guests began to arrive, stepping into the elegant space, murmuring their approval. From my position in the kitchen, I watched as my parents greeted their guests with the effortless grace of seasoned socialites. They had no idea what was coming. This anniversary would be talked about in Boston's elite circles for years. Just not for the reasons they expected. My father, impeccable in his custom tuxedo. My mother, resplendent in a designer gown. Together, they stood at the center of the Four Seasons ballroom, basking in the admiration of Boston's elite. They looked every inch the power couple they had spent decades crafting themselves to be. I checked my watch, 20 minutes until dinner service began. Around me, my team moved with quiet precision, each person knowing their role in what was about to unfold. The interactive tables were programmed, the projectors tested, the timing rehearsed to perfection. "Charlotte," Marcus murmured beside me, "the lawyer's here." I nodded as Mr. Harrison, my grandmother's attorney, took his seat at one of the central tables, the only person, besides Marcus, who knew what was coming. His presence was critical. At precisely 6:30, my mother lifted her glass and tapped it lightly, the delicate chime commanding the room's attention. "Before we begin dinner," she announced, her voice smooth and controlled, "Robert and I want to thank you all for joining us in celebrating 40 years of marriage. And, of course, we must thank Charlotte for catering this evening's meal." A polite smattering of applause followed. "Not our daughter, Charlotte, just Charlotte, always keeping that distance, that distinction." I stepped out of the kitchen, meeting the eyes of several guests as I nodded in acknowledgement. My father didn't look at me, too busy entertaining business associates. Margaret sat at the family table, perfectly poised, her expression carefully neutral, though I caught the flicker of barely concealed disdain when our eyes met. The first course arrived, a seemingly simple heirloom tomato soup. As the bowls were placed before each guest, the tables flickered to life. Projected onto the glossy surfaces were images from my childhood, family dinners where I sat alone at the kitchen counter while they entertained guests in the dining room, holidays where I wasn't at the table but in the kitchen, helping the staff. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. My mother's smile tightened, but she didn't speak, not here, not in front of them. "This soup," I said, my voice calm, clear, unwavering, "is made from tomatoes grown in my grandmother Eleanor's garden, the same garden where she taught me to cook while everyone else was too busy to notice I existed." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The second course was served, perfectly seared scallops, plated with delicate precision. The tables lit up again. Images of my graduation from culinary school, an event my parents hadn't attended, a slideshow of my restaurant's opening night, glowing reviews from critics, the ceremony where I received my first Michelin star. "Your scallops," I continued, watching my father now, "are paired with a sauce made from wine produced at Eleanor Palmer's vineyard, the same vineyard that, along with her estate and her shares in Palmer Industries, she left to me in her will." Silence. A beat. Then whispers. My father's head snapped up, color draining from his face. My mother's wine glass hovered motionless in her hand. Across the room, my father's business associates exchanged glances, calculating, assessing. They understood what this meant. My father felt what this meant. "What did you say?" His voice, low and sharp, cut through the hushed ballroom as he stood so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. Mr. Harrison rose calmly. "What your daughter said is correct, Mr. Palmer," he confirmed, his voice measured. "Your mother's will was very clear. The estate, the vineyard, and her 30% controlling interest in Palmer Industries all belong to Charlotte now." The air in the room shifted. My father clenched his jaw. My mother sat frozen. Margaret's carefully composed mask cracked. "This must be a mistake," she burst out, her voice thin with disbelief. "Why would grandmother leave everything to her?" I smiled as the next course arrived. "Because, Margaret," I said evenly, "while you and Dad were too busy running the company to visit her, I spent every Sunday cooking with her. I listened to her stories. I learned from her. She saw me, even when none of you did." Waiters set down the main course, a perfectly aged ribeye, seared and glistening with truffle butter. The final set of images appeared. My grandmother and me in her kitchen, laughing as we cooked together. Her last Christmas, when she insisted on dining at my restaurant instead of the family estate. The day she first tasted my food and cried, saying she was proud of me. "Your main course," I announced, my voice steady despite the weight in my chest, "is served with vegetables from Eleanor's garden and wine from her vineyard." She always said that good food brings people together, but only if they're willing to sit at the same table as equals. My father's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Charlotte," he growled, low and dangerous, "we need to discuss this, now." I met his gaze, held it. "No, Dad," I said, the finality in my voice ringing out across the room. "We don't. Everything has already been decided. The papers were signed this morning." A hush fell over the ballroom. I let the silence stretch before I added, "But don't worry, I won't run the company the way you did. I believe in giving people a chance to prove themselves, regardless of whether they fit into some predetermined mold." The rest of dinner passed in uneasy quiet. My mother barely touched her food. Margaret sent sharp, venomous looks in my direction. My father looked old, older than I'd ever seen him. Finally, dessert was served, a deconstructed apple pie, my grandmother's recipe. I stood once more, my last announcement ready. In honor of my grandmother's memory and her belief in nurturing talent wherever it's found, I said, scanning the room, letting my gaze settle on my parents, "I'm establishing a culinary scholarship program. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation will provide full funding for aspiring chefs who, like me, might not fit society's expectations, but have the passion and the drive to succeed." I set my napkin down, took a breath, and for the first time in my life, I let myself enjoy the silence that followed. I watched as my words settled over the room like a final curtain drop. This was never just about inheritance. It was about rewriting the narrative. About proving that the people who are overlooked, the ones dismissed as insignificant, can still shape the future. The evening ended earlier than expected. Guests murmured polite goodbyes, making hasty exits, the weight of the night pressing down on them. By the time the last of them had gone, my father finally approached me. His face was ashen, his voice low. "You've ruined everything," he said. "Was this your plan, to humiliate us in front of everyone we know?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, Dad, my plan was to show you exactly what you've been missing all these years, what you threw away because it didn't fit your perfect version of this family." By morning, the story had already spread through Boston's elite circles. Charlotte Palmer, the outcast chef, had taken control of her grandmother's fortune and used her own parents' anniversary to reveal it. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Margaret's texts oscillated between threats and desperate attempts at reconciliation. My mother's messages were laced with guilt, disguised as concern. "We should talk, Charlotte, we're still family." But it was my father's email that caught my attention. Subject, "Last night. Charlotte. What you did was calculated and cruel. You've embarrassed this family and potentially damaged the company I spent my life building. If this was about revenge, congratulations, you've succeeded. Your father." I read it twice before clicking reply. "Dad. This wasn't about revenge, it was about showing you what you ignored, not just with me, but with your own mother. While you were busy building your empire, she saw what you didn't. That's why she made the choice she did. I don't intend to hurt the company. Unlike you, I believe in second chances. If you're interested in talking about the future, meet me at Maan tonight at 8. Charlotte." To my surprise, he came. I watched from the kitchen as he stepped inside, looking uncomfortable, out of place. He had never set foot in Maan before, had never tasted my food or acknowledged my success. I led him to a private dining room where a simple meal awaited. His mother's recipes. The same dishes she used to make when he was young. He sat down, staring at the bowl of beef stew in front of him. "She used to make this every Sunday. He murmured. I know, I said. She taught me. She told me stories about you while we cooked, how you loved this stew, how you used to help her in the kitchen before the business took over your life. He took a bite. His hands trembled slightly. It tastes exactly the same, he whispered. She wanted you to have more than just the business, Dad. She wanted you to remember what it felt like to care about something beyond success and status. That's why she left everything to me, not to hurt you, but to make you stop and think. And for the first time in years, he did. We sat for 2 hours, talking more than we had in a decade. He told me about his childhood dreams of becoming a chef before his father pushed him into business. I told him stories about grandmother that he had never heard, moments he had missed while chasing his version of success. I don't expect forgiveness, he admitted, his voice heavy. What we did to you, how we treated you, it was wrong. I'm not looking for apologies, I replied. I want change, real change, starting with Palmer Industries. No more rewarding people just because they fit a certain mold. He studied me carefully, then nodded. And how do you propose we do that? First, we establish the Eleanor Palmer Foundation properly, not just culinary scholarships, but programs for employees' children, small business support, real community outreach. Then, we overhaul company culture. It's time Palmer Industries stands for something more than profits. I expected resistance, a fight. Instead, he asked, will you teach me? I frowned. Teach you what? How to cook. He hesitated, looking almost embarrassed. Your grandmother's recipes. I'd like to learn. That was 6 months ago. Now, every Sunday morning, my father arrives at Maan before we open. We cook together. Sometimes, he tells me stories about his mother, stories I never knew. Margaret eventually came around, especially after I invited her to join us. Turns out, she has a talent for pastries, though she'll never admit it to her society friends. Even my mother, slowest to accept the changes, has started attending our Sunday sessions. Last week, she asked me to teach her how to make grandmother's apple pie. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation is thriving. 15 aspiring chefs have already received full scholarships. Our community initiatives are making a tangible difference. Palmer Industries is changing too, slowly, but surely. As for me, I'm still running Maan, still creating, still telling stories through food. But now, when I look out into the dining room, I sometimes see my family there, not just as guests, but as part of my world. It's not perfect, we still have our moments. But last night, as I watched my father carefully chopping vegetables in my kitchen, his tie tucked into his shirt to keep it clean, I realized something. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes, it's giving people the chance to change. To see the world differently. To taste what they've been missing. My grandmother understood that. That's why she left me her legacy. Not to divide us, but to bring us back to the same table. Maan's menu still features the tomato soup from that anniversary night. And beneath its description, there's a small note. From Eleanor's garden, where every meal tells a story, and every story deserves to be heard. It's our most popular dish.